All right, but supposedly he has, and I don't know if he has it now or not. So, all right, so let's get started. We left off yesterday. We went over pages 1 through 44. So we're on this user experience. All right, user interactions, and we went through 4.1 yesterday, which was buttons and clickable images, and we also went through 4.2, and I don't remember exactly what that was what was called. It was other controls. All right, we hit on most of the other controls then. Today we're picking it up on page 45, talking about menus and pickers. Now, let me just start by saying this, and that is, we're going to get much of the chapter that's in here. What the author is going to say is, when you create a brand new Android app, we've been choosing empty activity, correct? But they're saying if you choose basic activity, all this stuff for setting up menus, it's all done for you. Virtually all of it. Now you have to go and modify it, of course, but all this stuff, you got to do this, but almost every time they must preface this in here at least a dozen times by saying, if you created this as a basic activity, you can skip the next section. So, what does that mean? Remember the difference between these. A basic activity has got the FAB, the floating action button, that's down near the bottom. All right? You can always remove that if you don't need it. All right? That's not a big thing, but it's got everything set up for you. And the reason I'm telling you that is I'm going to assume then that we have a basic activity, so I don't have to sit and read to you. Does that make sense? All right, probably a lot like yesterday. I think yesterday the lecture was between 40 and 45 minutes. I can't imagine this one taking much more time than that. All right, I'm in the middle right now of planning out, and tomorrow we're going to do the rest of it, the rest of the chapter. That should make sense. Now, in the worst case scenario, that if we don't have class the next 2 days, tomorrow I'm just going to do that lecture. All right, so if you say, well, geez, do I, if it's snowing out like crazy or it snowed and it stopped, I might want to just go out and shovel. All right, I don't have a snowblower. Well, they're in my hands. All right, so we'll see how that works. And then what I do then on Thursday is I'm going to actually probably end up also giving you the code, but then I'm going to go over a couple programs. Does that all make sense? All right. All right, so let's pick it up here. We're on menus and pickers. And the first thing that they talk about in here is, if you look on the screen, they show you the 4 different types of menus that you can have. The first one that's shown there is an option menu. And typically, when you start talking about menus in an app, of course, I don't have mine open anymore. All right, let me just grab some, because this is one of the things that I'm working on right now. I'm going to have you modify this. But this is something I created was so long ago that it took me a long time to upgrade it. All right, so it's going to be this. So you put in an amount for your bill as it shows right here. So I come in here and I went out and I spent $100. Oops, well, it's redoing itself. All right, there we go. So I spent $100. All right, and then this is a seek bar right here. So notice if I put it about in the middle, it says the tip percentage was 51%, so I'm tipping $51 and my total is $151. Does that make sense? All right. Now, the reason I'm showing you that, though, is when you look up here where it says tip calculator, that's the only thing we've cared about thus far. All right? And that's all fine and dandy. All right, but the area that's in here where I've got my mouse kind of circling right there is typically where you put a menu. All right? And you should always shoot for, if you're going to put a menu there, to have no more than 2 or 3 things. I would suggest, if it's going to be something like you're going to have like a save, and let's say something like that, try to use icons rather than text. All right, but you typically don't want more than 2 or 3. But there also is an area, again, if you look on the screen. So if I had 2 icons right here and here, and let's say that's all I had room for, I'm going to see 3 dots over here. And that's going to mean that there's an overflow area, that I can click on the overflow area and get even more menu options. Does that all make sense? All right. So I'm not going to do that much right now with menus. We're going to look at them. All right, and you will have a little bit to do on your next assignment with them as well. All right, so like I said, this is one of the things that we'll be working on, but this is what I wanted to show you here. All right, then the next one that they show you, again going back to this is a contextual or context menu. All right, and typically it's has something to do in context with where you currently are on the page. Does that make sense? So it'd be a context in, with whatever you're working on. The third one is a contextual action bar. And if you look up here, this is what I was talking about. All right, this is the kind of thing that you would put in here. So if you wanted to delete, you'd have a garbage can, edit, etc., that kind of thing. All right. What I'm hoping to do, and if I have time to do this between now and Thursday, this is one of the things I'm going to do, is to demonstrate some of this stuff. I'm going to create a very simple to-do list. All right, and we'll have the ability to create to-do items, to modify to-do items, and to delete to-do items, okay? What you're going to do then, so this will be your list right here. We'll have a fab down here, and whenever you click the fab, it'll allow you to enter in a new to-do. All right, does that make sense? So it'll come up to a new screen, and it'll let you enter a new to-do. When you click on the pencil here, it'll allow you to, if you have a to-do highlighted, it'll bring up that to-do on a new activity where you can modify that. Does that make sense? All right. And then finally, if you've got one highlighted and you click the garbage can, it'll allow you to delete. All right. And when we do this, we're going to bring up what are called alert dialogues. So for instance, kind of like a message box that we had in C#, before it deletes it, you'll bring up a dialogue that'll say, are you sure you want to delete this item? Something like that. Does that all make sense? All right. And we'll do that, and we will design the main screen ourselves, and we'll look at the functionality for doing the other stuff as well. But then you'll be responsible basically for getting those pages, customizing those, probably putting in some kind of a splash screen, etc. What I'd like to do after that, it won't be next week, but as we go further on into the book, I'd like to take this to-do list and turn it into what's called the Recyclerview. All right? And again, I've said this before, or I think I have. If you say, I don't know what a Recyclerview is, you all do, even if you think you don't. If my guess is that you've probably got a lot more than I do, but if I go over to my phone and I come over here and I click, let's see, where is it? If I go to my contact list on my phone, how I can scroll up type of thing, that's what we're going to have the ability to do. Plus, while I'm doing this, I've got to find the code for it. I don't remember, but it's not hard. We'll probably set up, if you want to delete something, there's two ways that you can delete it. You can click the icon here that's got the trash can, or if this is highlighted, you can click and drag to the right, and then it'll also come up and say, do you want to delete this item? All right, so it's looking more and more like a, quote, real app, unquote. All right, then after we get done with that and we go in and we put that into a Recyclerview, then I'd like us to be able to save all this stuff to a database so it persists. All right, so it's going to be kind of an evolving type of project. Does that all make sense? All right. And the last one that you see here is a pop-up menu. You've all seen these. Typically, if you're on a page and you right mouse click, there's a pop-up menu. For instance, the one right here. All right. So on the next page, then they explain what each one of these are. I'm not going to read that to you. All right. But you can set up any of these. Okay. Now the whole thing collectively that you saw at the top, as it says, it's called the app bar or the action bar. And again, it says when you create an activity from a template, it's automatically included. But by default, the only thing that it has, all right, is the title. And it grabs that title again from your Android manifest.xml file. All right, so we've talked about that a little bit. All right, so they explain each of the parts or whatever you want to call it right here. So number one that you see right there, as they say, it's the navigation button or the up button. All right. Number two is the title. Typically, that's what we've seen so far has been the title. Number three, these are the icons. Now, if you were doing some kind of a social media app, this would probably be a search. And this would mean if you wanted to like something. Does that make sense? And this is the overflow area. All right, if you want more of an explanation than what I'm giving you there, you can look on the bottom of page 47. Okay? All right. Now, the author mentions then on the next page, at the top of the page there, frequently used option menu items should appear as icons in the app bar when possible. The problem with making them text is the difference that you see in the picture on the left and the picture on the right. All right? If you decide you're going to make a very complex menu structure, all right, it can be very hard, especially if you think about somebody looking at this on a phone. All right, it's bad enough if you're looking on it. You'll notice that when you get to the emulator. I mean, here I can make this bigger, right? I can do this. All right, but you're not going to be able to typically do that on your phone. All right. So again, the author mentions here in this figure. So this whole thing collectively is known as the app bar up here, the whole thing. All right, and as it says, it includes the title, the options menu, and the overflow button. So that's the title here. Those are the options here. That's the overflow button. And you can even set the overflow button to appear kind of like when you want it to appear, for lack of better words. All right. So going on to the next page here, the author says, each activity that uses the default theme also has an action bar. So some themes also set up an action bar by default. And it says when you start up an app from a template, such as an empty activity, and that's what we've been doing, an action bar appears as the app bar. There's all these things, sometimes people call them the same thing. Sometimes people differentiate between the two of them. They basically are the same thing. All right. So it says features were added to the native action bar over time. It says for this reason, if you add an options menu, you want to make sure that you've got this support, and click the link to find out how you do that, okay? All right. Now, look on the screen if you would, please. I'm not going to read to you. But it says right here, you can start your project through a basic activity. And that's why the author says in that tip, it says if you use the basic activity, you can skip the rest of this section because the template provides everything you need. All right, and that's several pages that are in here. So I'm going to assume that we're going to be using it, but we will highlight some of the stuff that's in there that I think is germane to what we're talking about. Okay? And again, it says if you're not using it, this section describes how to add the toolbar yourself. And here's the 4-step process. So in other words, if you wanted to go back to a project that you already had created and add a menu to it, this is the process that you'd have to go back and do. All right? So adding the support libraries, they go through, starting on the bottom of page 49 here. All right, it says if you start using the basic activity, again, skip this step. If you're not, add 2 things to your project, the app compat support library for the toolbar class and the design library for the no action bar themes. All right? And again, if you click on here, they're basically going to show you, because this is going to bring you to the, I believe it's the developer.android, and that will show you how to do it. All right? Kind of an important point here, if you haven't noticed this before, I mean, this manual was written in 2018, which means it's now 3.5 to 4 years old, right? And when they tell you something, if they ever reference a certain version of something, it's possible that it's an older version. So what the author says, it says, if necessary, update the version number for dependencies. If the number you specified is lower than the currently available number, Android Studio warns you. Now, as an example, when we get in and start talking about Recyclerview in a few weeks, it used to be that you had to put in this line of code when you used a Recyclerview. All right? And I always had to have people go out to developer.android.com to make sure we were using the right version. Because if we weren't, and you brought it in, it would work, but it would come back with a message that said, you're not using the most up-to-date version. All right? Now, typically, when you, at least unless they've changed it recently, when you put in a Recyclerview, the system itself says, hey, you're about to put it in Recyclerview. Do you want me to go in and change the Gradle file for you? Which is kind of nice. All right. All right. So next they talk about themes. There will be a whole section later on in this PDF on styles and themes. Now, what's a theme? A theme is a collection of styles. What's a style? Well, if I said I wanted all my buttons to look like this, I want all of my edit texts to look like this, I want all of my text views to look like this, I could create styles for each one of those. Collectively, once I do that and I put all those styles together, it becomes a theme. Now, if you don't do any of that, if you say, well, I've never done that, it's because there is a default theme that's created for you when you create these things. But again, as you go in, and we have to start talking about this probably next week, about the final project that you're going to do in here, this is where you can go in and you want this to look kind of glitzy. All right. In other words, especially, so let's say that Nicholas decides he's going to create this game. And it's going to be real simple, but he's got a version of it that's harder that he wants to charge money for. Well, you want to make sure that even the simple one looks nice so that people look at it and they're like, geez, I'd pay, he only wants $5.99 for this? I'd do that. All right. And there's a guy that I watch. I don't know how I got him. He sent me an email a long time ago, and I'll see if I can find if I got any of his stuff saved. It's on my other email. And his name is Human. All right. And so as you can guess, I do think English was his first language, but his parents maybe weren't born here or whatever. But the point is, the guy has published over 100 apps, and he starts talking about the fact that, even if you've got an app, if you've got an app that you're not going to charge a lot for, then what do you have to do? You got to make sure a lot of people buy it if you want to make money, right? And if you've got an app that you're going to charge a lot for, you don't have to sell as many because, so he talks about that, all right? But he also talks about the fact that regardless of how much you're charging, how important it is. I mean, if we're going to create a to-do list, and let's say that we get done and Christopher says, mine's really good. You know what? I'm going to go and submit that to the App Store. Well, first of all, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. There's about 1,000 to-do lists out there already, but that's still okay. All right. But the point is, whether it's free or not free, when somebody's going to go and start to look through them and they say whether or not they should use yours or not, your app, one of the things they're going to look for is glitz. They're going to see how easy is it to use, how cool does it look, and if there's somebody who has some kind of accessibility issue, does it provide for accessibility? All right. All right. So on the middle of the page there, right here, it says you can modify the theme to provide a style for an app bar. Well, there is a styles.xml file, but you can either modify that file or you can create your own style. Does that make sense? In fact, you could have different styles. All right. Some of you, and it was good that you did this, some of you, when you went and set up and we looked at landscape, etc., and remember your thing was supposed to look nice on both landscape and it was supposed to look nice in portrait, you created two different files, which was good. That's actually what I was hoping for without having to say it. All right. But the point is, it's possible that if you were going to do one thing in portrait and one in landscape, you could have two different themes. All right, if you wanted to do so. So they run through the steps here on the bottom of page 50, the bottom half, of how you can go in, and it's also what goes up to the top of page 51. And as it says there, how you can go in and modify the the styles.xml file to make changes to it. All right. You'll notice on the bottom of the page it says, open the manifest.xml and add the no action bar theme in app compat to the application. And again, if you run through and just look at the steps that are in there, I'm not going to say this is real easy or it's real hard, but it's very straightforward as far as what you have to do. All right? Okay. Next, on page 51 here, adding an app bar and a toolbar to the layout. All right? As it says, if you start an app project with a basic activity, you can skip the whole section. All right? But if you wanted to go back, and I may have you do this, just go back to one of your projects. Now, what's the problem with having me have you go back to one of your projects and do this? I have no idea if you actually went back to your project and went through this stuff so you could understand how to do it, or you just started a new project, you made it a basic activity, and you copied all your code over. all right? But the point is, it's not out of the realm of possibility that if you were to go and try to become an Android developer and you were to go into a place and they were to give you some kind of a test to do, that they may ask you to use an empty layout. So you'd start, in fact, there's another one that says no activity, not empty, but no activity, where you got to add everything. You've got to add your XML file and everything else. So it's possible that, that you could be asked to do something like that. But they did a pretty good job. I read through it, here on the bottom half of page 51, and they kind of just show you on page 51 and 52, they go over all the steps, and I thought they did a pretty decent job of running through it. All right? The only way that this would make sense would be if we sat there and started doing all this by hand. The lecture then would be more than 4 hours. I can just tell you that right now. All right? All right. So again, adding code to set up the app bar, as they say, if it's a basic activity, you don't need to do this. But it's kind of neat because what's happening in here is they run through. Now notice, in the onCreate method, call set support action bar with the toolbar. So they are showing you the kind of stuff that the code that will be put in there for a basic activity, and you can see exactly what everything does. All right? All right. Adding the options menu on the bottom of page 52, as the author says, Android provides a standard XML format to define option menu items. All right, and they will show you some of that. The whole idea of getting a menu to work, it's very similar to a button. In other words, the menu is going to respond to a click event. All right, so much of the stuff, if you turn up to page 53 and you look at the picture, looks similar to the kind of thing that we would do if we were using a button. Now with a button, it's an on-click listener, and notice here it's either an on-click or it's an on-options item selected, but the ideas are the same between them if you read the stuff that's in here, okay? Now it says inflating the menu if you look on step 2, all right? Typically when you set something up and you need it to actually expand, so to speak, in the actual app, it's called inflating. You're going to see the word inflating more than once this semester. All right? And if you're going to, again, some of this goes back to what we talked about the other day, and that is, if you're going to put icons in there, the icons should make sense. All right? Like a pencil for edit, and a trash can for delete. Don't mix those up. All right? You just don't want to do something like that, period. All right, the stuff should make sense. It should be intuitive also. All right, so they go through creating an XML resource on page 54 in the book there. Okay, if you do that and you go through it, if you turn up to page 55, this is all you create, is this thing here that says settings. All right, and you'll notice you want to do some playing around with it, etc. All right, but you could go in there and then start making some additional changes. On the bottom of page 55, they start talking about designing how these items should appear. All right? And they show you on page 56 here how you add icons, okay, which is typically the one that people care the most about for menu items. All right? And they even say that they give you some, in here, they give you some basically some how-tos and how not to type of things. All right? So if you go and follow those steps, you're going to have something that looks similar to this right here. And you'll notice in here there is some space between here, but you notice again that these are numbered. And they numbered them 10, 20, 30, 40. And the author even says on the bottom of the page, they could have used 1, 2, 3, and 4, but typically when you set it up, you space them, you put 5 or 10 between each one in case you'd want to add something under there later. All right, it just makes it easier for yourself, that's all. So again, by setting that up, you're going to have this. Okay. As far as how this stuff appears, if you look up on page 58, mentioned this before, always means just that. Now notice with always, if you look there, it says in the last sentence, if you set multiple items to always appear in the app bar, they might overlap with something else in the app bar, such as the title. You probably don't ever want to use always. if you're going to have something that's going to go down because you're taking up real estate on the screen. If room is just that, all right? If there is room, they'll put in as much room, for everything else that's there. If there's not enough room, it'll set up an overflow menu for you, and it'll put everything in the overflow. All right. Never, as it says, never place this item in the app bar. Instead, list the item in the app bar's overflow menu. So that might be something that you want to do. All right. And then finally, as it says with text, it says this attribute is used primarily to include the title with the icon in the app bar, because if the item appears in the overflow menu, the title appears regardless. And again, they show you some examples of this. If you look on page 59, all right, and you've kind of got to go in there and make your own decision as far as how you want to set this stuff up. All right. But again, when you start thinking about it, my hope is that one of the things that you're going to put in for your electronic portfolio will be your final project. All right. And it should make sense that in your final project, since you're going to have multiple activities in there, that you'd have a menu. All right. So, I mean, if you, let's just say you put 4 different projects into your electronic portfolio. And the first one you called My First Android App, and it didn't have much in it. That would be expected. But if you say, this is my final project, and you don't put a lot of the bells and whistles in there, and you go out and you apply for a job as an Android developer, what they're going to look at is, okay, what did you put in that project? What do you know? All right. All right. And they do mention there, as you can see, it says number 1, the options menu action icons. All right. Number 2 is the overflow. Okay. Number 3 is the options overflow menu. And number 4 it's not even listed in here. All right. All right. Now, this is the kind of the key thing, because this is what's happening behind the scenes. So I'm assuming right now that we have done this, but we have used the basic activity. Okay? So on the bottom here of page 60, the author says, if you start an app using the basic activity template, the template adds the code for inflating the options menu. All right, it says if you are not, inflate the menu resource in your activity by overriding the onCreate options menu. The reason I'm telling you that, the reason that's important is, guess what? If you look up on the screen here, you've already been doing that. You're already overriding onCreate. So they're saying in here that there's another thing that you have to override. And it also tells you want to override that. I believe you override that, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that you overrode that right in your onCreate method. All right. It says the menu inflator class provides the inflate method, which takes 2 parameters. The good news is when you start to run these things, you may have noticed this with our editor, you may not have, but when you put in there and you got the name of your menu inflator, and you put in your set of parentheses, it's going to show you, if you put your mouse there, what it is expecting for parameters, the number that it's expecting and the type that it's expecting. Then on the middle of page 61, it's handling the menu item click. All right. Not a lot different, again, than the way that it's set up for a button. If you look right there, what do we have? Android on click equals on favorites click. Then you want to go in and you want to write that routine called on favorites click. Or, again, you can do it this way. You probably want to use this one, if you look on the screen here, because with the on options item selected, if you look up on the screen right here, or you look in your book on the bottom of page 61, typically you're going to want to have one routine that's going to handle all of your menu options. And that's what they're showing right here. All right. And this is just good practice. So if you click the order option, you call an external method called show order. Status, one called show status, etc. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. It's a little different than the way we usually write switch statements too, because notice here they're just returning true with each one of these. You're calling a routine and you're returning true, which is supposing, it depends on how you're calling this. Now with the default it has do nothing. There you may or may not want to return false. They're not showing it in there, but there might be a reason that you'd want to do that. All right. So those are just regular menus. The next are contextual menus, starting on page 62. As it says, it allows users to take an action on a selected view. They're most often used for items in a recycler view. All right. So again, the idea is if you highlight one of these and you click on it, what they're showing right here is it'll bring up something that looks like this. All right. It says their Android provides two types of contextual menus. A context menu shown on the left, which appears as a floating list of menu items when the user performs a long tap on a view. Typically, a long tap is defined as at least 2 to 2.5 seconds. All right. And then you've got the contextual action bar shown on the right. As it says, it appears at the top of the screen in place of the app bar. All right. So do you want the words or do you want the symbols? Is what they're saying right here. All right. It says the familiar resource inflate design pattern is used to create a context menu. It's used for all of these menus. So the stuff that we've talked about, all right, it's going to apply regardless basically of the type of menu that you're creating. So they go through the process pictorially here, then underneath it, they go through the 5 different steps. All right. Now, you'll notice if you look at it for step 1, it says create an XML menu resource file. Yeah. You've got menus already, and you can go in and make your own menus. All right. So as far as creating the resource file, bottom of page 63 and going on to page 64, all right, it says there to create this, follow the steps in the previous section. So you might have to go back and take a little bit of a look at this. All right. Registering a view to the context menu. All right, so which menu, if this is going to be contextual, do you want to use this? You probably don't want to use this for every single one of your activities. Which activity do you want to use it for, or which activities, and you've got to register it then. Then as it says, implement the onCreateContext method. All right, and it's not that much code there, and they explain underneath it exactly what's happening in there as well. All right. And then on the next page, they show what happens when you actually select one of the items that are in there. So they give you an example here on page 66. You've got this text. And the idea is you click on the text someplace and you get this. All right, what do you want to do with it type of an idea? They mention here on the top of page 67, it says if you're using the menu information for a recycler view or a grid view, you would add a statement before the switch to gather specific information about the selected view. Okay. Again, I think this stuff is going to make more sense when we do see it in action. Okay. All right. A contextual action bar. Again, the other one we looked at, the contextual menu, had words. The contextual action bar is going to have pictures. All right, as it says, it appears on the top of the screen to present actions to the user after they do a long click. So you can literally change the menu that comes up then. All right. And when we look through the process, it's not exactly mirrors the other one, but it's going to be very similar. Again, these are going to be different depending on the type of menu you're working with and exactly how you're setting it up. But you'll notice again, create the XML file, use the set on long click listener, etc. So a lot of that stuff will be the same. Then they run through the steps. You can see on page 69, first creating the resource file, then setting the long click listener, then implementing the action mode callback interface. All right. That pops us all the way to page 72, where they talk about starting the action mode. All right. And that's it for that section. So we got about 10 more pages to go in here, and the next thing is a pop-up menu. Now, before we go, well, we'll wait. I'll do that. Let's finish this up first because there's not that much to do. So a pop-up, as I mentioned, if you look at a pop-up right here, this is the way I look at a pop-up. When you right mouse click is what comes up. That's typically how most people set up a pop-up. As they say, it's a vertical list of items anchored to a view. It appears below the anchor view if there's room or above the view otherwise. Typically used to provide an overflow of actions, all right, or the second part of a two-part command. It can be, you can use it for anything, all right. I mean, sometimes what you'll find is, I've seen this in apps where if you right mouse click on it at any time, one of the things that'll appear there is a help screen. So if you want to be able to quick jump to help at any time, all right. And there might be other things. You might have an app where you might actually show people, hey, this is an example of how the app works. Not just a help screen, but actually show like the equivalent of a program to run if you wanted to do something like that. They go through then on the bottom of page 73 how to set up these steps. And what you find out is, again, they're similar, not identical to the ones that we've talked about previously. All right, but each one is explained then on pages 74 and 75. All right. The last thing that's discussed in the chapter then, starting on page 76, are dialogues and pickers. Okay? We're going to look at dialogues. We're probably not going to do that much with pickers. Now, let's pretend for a second that James decides that what he wants to do for his project is he knows somebody who's a doctor, and they're not computer savvy, and he'd like to be able to set up an appointment system for them. You could do that. And then you'd probably use a date picker for that. All right, and maybe, you might use both a date and a time picker. A date so they can pick the date, and then a time for the time of an appointment. All right, but we're not going to really talk about those. We will talk about dialogues, and you see examples of dialogues here on page 76. So you're going to learn how to build these. They're not difficult really to do. They're alert dialogues, basically. All right, so as the author says here on the top of page 76, a dialog is a window that appears on the top of the display or fills the display. Typically, a dialog is modal. You by now should all know what modal means. It's going to ask you a question, and you have to, like here, either agree or disagree, or here you have to cancel or disregard. You have to have some kind of an action that you specify. You've got a clue as to what's going on. All right? So it says you can use a dialog to provide choices in the style of radio buttons. All right, it says on the right here, so I believe that's what these are right here. You can set them up as, a lot of times you see it like this. You can make these look more like buttons if you want them to, as opposed to the flat type of buttons that we talked a little bit about yesterday. The base class, as mentioned on the bottom of the page here, is a dialog. It says there are several useful dialog subclasses that you can use to do different things. All right, the SDK provides ready-to-use dialog subclasses. One of those is pickers. And the picker is shown on the next page here on 77. You've all seen things like this before. All right, I'm sure you have on your phone or whatever. All right. Now, the author gives you a tip there underneath the picture and says, best practices recommend using dialogue sparingly as they interrupt the user's workflow. In other words, you don't want to ask the user every time they do something, are you sure you want to do that? But a real good time to ask if they want to actually modify, is if they click the delete. All right, and you're best off if you can say, so if this was a list right here, this isn't a good example, but let's suppose that if you clicked on one of these, that this said delete. All right, and you clicked, instead of cancel, you clicked the delete button. You'd probably want to come up with some kind of an alert dialog there that said, are you sure you want to delete Luna? All right, and I've said this before, back in the day, one of the things that I would teach was DOS, the disk operating system. So it was all the commands you used here. All the different stuff that you could use in here. All right? Well, one of the things that was in there that we would go through was there was a command that was called RM for remove. And if you said RM star dot star, that meant remove everything. That was one of the few times that the operating system would come back and say, are you sure? Y or N. Now, if you said Y, again, I've said this before, it's not a joke, it didn't come back and say, are you really sure? All right, it just removed it. But again, always think of the ramifications when somebody does something. What's the worst thing that could happen? And if it's something that could be fairly bad for the program, let's say, then what you typically will want to do is you want to bring up some kind of an alert dialog to make sure that that's what indeed they want to do. All right. Showing an alert dialog starting on the bottom of page 77, the author says, alerts are urgent interruptions requiring acknowledgement of action basically before going on type of thing. All right, we talked a little bit about it again before. Now, here's an example. Maybe you've seen something like this. When you've been out, you tried to use some kind of a location program. All right. Or another popular one, it's like when you sign up. I love these things. When you sign up for an account or you download something or whatever, and they say you have to agree to our terms and conditions. And of course, they always have something where you can print them, but they're 50 or 60 pages, it seems like. So you agree to them. And the bad thing about doing that is often what you've done is you've allowed them to use your name and your email, and you put yourself on a list, all right, where you can be contacted. So with some people, how come I get all this spam? That's one of the reasons you get all that spam. All right, I think that during my lecture today in the other class, they had 2 hours to work on something, and then I went over it after 2 hours. I think I got either 6 or 7 spam calls. All right, which is, to me, they're just getting worse all the time. And it says on there, notice the title is optional. Most alerts don't need titles, so it depends on what it is you're asking. You've got the content area, then you've got some kind of action buttons. On the bottom of page 78, going on to the next couple pages, they show you how to build one of these. So as it says, the alert dialog.builder class uses the builder design pattern, which makes it easy to create an object from a class that has a lot of required and optional attributes. So they show an example here, and it looks, I think at least, a little more intimidating than it is. All right, you've got to import in what you need. All right, here's where they're creating the new thing. They're setting the title, they're setting the message, and then you're going to do something like this. You've got to realize that even more so than the way I think, at least, than what you see in like C#, this stuff is stupid. In other words, you'll notice that there's a positive button and a negative button. There is a neutral button that you can add that goes between the positive and the negative. So if you wanted to have like a yes, no, and then just like cancel or something, you could make a neutral button. But the idea is you can have only one positive button, and that's when they click OK or they click yes or whatever, and it's what you want to have happen then. You can have one negative button. So again, when they click cancel or they click no, what do you want to have happen then? And that's what they talk about, and they mention a little bit more on it in the bottom of page 79 and the top of page 80. You can see all it takes to display it, alertdialog.show. Does that sound familiar? Isn't that pretty much the way we did a toast? All right. So the chapter ends here. It just goes up to page 84, but it ends here with the 4 or 5 pages then on date and time pickers. And as mentioned right here, Android provides ready-to-use dialogues called pickers for picking a time or a date. It says use them to ensure your users pick a valid time or date. What's nice about that, you don't have to worry. So if it was something out in 2024, and somebody says, hey, you got an appointment here for February 29th. Yeah, it'll already know that that's a leap year, as an example, all right? It'll know how many days are in May, how many days are in March, etc., all right? And the time, there's all sorts of things that you can put in there for the time. Yeah, you can give them time pickers, but you can set up a picker so that if I'm a doctor and the only hours that I'm open are 9 to 5, I don't allow you to set up appointments before 9. I don't allow you to set up appointments after 5. All right? And that's what they talk about in here. Okay? It says when showing a picker, you should use an instance of a dialog fragment. Now, fragments are an important concept in here. So just please make sure you listen to this, okay? What fragments allow you to do is separate your screen. So you can separate your screen. So imagine that I had a game screen. And on the first half, I wanted you to be able to play the game. And on the second half, so on the left half, you can play the game. And then maybe a little bit on the right half, it would show the highest scores. It would show you whatever. All right. You can use fragments to do things like that. There's other things for it too. But it says a fragment is a behavior or a portion of a UI within an activity. It's like a mini activity within the main activity. And you can have it do whatever it is you want it to do. As they mentioned in that second last paragraph on page 80, if you click fragments, it says see fragments in the API guide. That's again going to bring you back to developer.android.com. A benefit of using these is mentioned on the bottom paragraph on the page here. It says is you can isolate the code sections for managing the date and time. All right. It says you can also use the dialog fragment to manage the dialog lifecycle. Another advantage is you can implement different layout configurations, all right, for different size handsets. In other words, you want your clock will very likely look different than your calendar will, all right? All right, and then they show you how to add a fragment there on page 81, how to extend the dialog fragment for a picker, also on page 81. How to show the picker on page 82, how to process the picker's choice, also on page 82. All right. Now, there's a little bit, all that stuff was on the date picker, and if you go down to the bottom of page 83, basically the author says, oh yeah, there's a time picker, and it's pretty much the same stuff, except for the few things that they show right here. All right, I'm not going to read them to you. You can look at them yourselves. But as it says, you can read all about setting up pickers in pickers right there. And again, where are we? We're at developer.android.com, and we're in the pickers section. All right? So that's it for this part. So the rest of the period today will be lab. And tomorrow then, I'm going to pick it up on, whoops, wrong page. Wrong one. Here we go. Right here. So tomorrow, we're going to talk about user navigation, okay? And you can see what's in there, and it'll be, so yesterday's lecture was 44 pages. Today's lecture is about 41 pages. Tomorrow's lecture is about 40 pages. So they all are about the same size, all right? Now, if I get some of this stuff done, then I might go a little bit longer tomorrow, but, again, if, he doesn't like me saying stuff like this, but if the weather's that bad, I can tell when you guys add on to Teams. I can tell when you're there or you're not. I can't tell, if you just turn it on and you go outside and play in the snow, I have no idea, But like in my morning class, there's 7 in there, and there's, depending on the day, there's 3 or 4. Like this morning, there were 3. All right? And with the other ones, there's one guy I've never talked to, but we email all the time, but I've never talked to him. All right, and that's the way it's going to start being in fall, because in fall everything is going to be online. All right. I think the class that you guys are taking is going to be online too, but I haven't been told yet. All right, it's going to be, that'll be your last class, because there'll be you two, and there'll be the 3 guys who were in your class last semester. But I don't know. The only way they'll do that is if they can give me this room, probably. So either we'll have that or else it'll be online. I'd rather have it in here. And I think it's only fair because you guys took all your other courses this way. They may look at it that, well, wait a minute, we made them go in the classroom for the first semester, then they were online for the second semester, then we're going to make them in the classroom again in the third semester, then they're going to be online again in the fourth semester. So they may not want to do that. I don't know. The other thing we're fighting about, fighting isn't the right word, but it's the one I use, is can I teach from home? All right. And it's funny because I asked one of the people I won't mention the person's name, but I asked somebody who deals a lot with the people in St. Louis, and they told me that as far as they know, St. Louis has got about 40 to 50 internet instructors, and there's only a couple of them that ever come in. Most of them are totally work from home. We'll see how it works. All right. Any questions on anything? So you know what we're doing tomorrow? All right. If I do get a little further than I think I'm going to get, then tomorrow I'll send you the code for this stuff. Last thing I want to tell you, if you would please, and that is, where is this? I have not looked at this yet. I'm going to look at it before the class ends. But, where is it? I hope I still have it open. Let's see. No, no, not that. Support library pickers. No. All right. Remember at the beginning of the semester, I had mentioned to you, I'm gonna try to find it here. There it is. I gave you this at the beginning of the semester. And I said we were going to do these, and then nobody has done them, including me. So, but it's right here. All right. These are those code labs. Now, maybe you've been doing them. All right. Much of the ones for Chapter 3, we've been doing stuff ourselves. It's a lot harder than what's in there. All right. But once we come to this point in Unit 4 here, where is it getting started? Activities and intents. There. I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to see if I think it's worth you going over. All right. And that may be part, if I do, that's going to be part of your homework then. All right. So I'm going to look at this before the period ends. And you'll notice that the last thing they have in here is they start to get into the Recyclerview. All right. And that's probably the most pain in the butt thing about doing this, because there's so much stuff that you've got to do to set it up. Actually, using it's simple. Setting it up is kind of a pain. All right. So that's what I have.